Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, the Senate Majority Leader sharply criticizing Israel. What Chuck Schumer said about Prime Minister Netanyahu and how Republicans are responding, Luis Martinez reports. President Biden campaigning today in the key battleground state of Michigan, but a new poll shows him trailing former President Trump. How the two are clashing over Social Security. Iris Tao in D.C. Prosecutors in New York saying they're willing to delay former President Trump's criminal case there. When will we have his next trial date? Former President Trump in Florida today, hoping to see his classified documents case dismissed, why the judge declined. Arlene Richards at the courthouse with in-depth coverage of the arguments today. The crisis in Haiti could bring more illegal immigrants to the United States. We have details on a possible plan to house some of them at Guantanamo Bay.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer sharply criticizing the Israeli Prime Minister, dominating the airwaves at House Republicans' annual policy retreat. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez is at the Greenbrier Resort in West Virginia. Luis, what did Schumer say and how are Republicans responding?
Good evening, Tiffany. Yes, today was supposed to be a day of House Republican unity in the second day of their annual policy conference. But Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer took to the floor of the Senate and made comments on the government of Israel and also made calls for new elections in Israel, calling Bibi Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, an obstacle to peace. Let's listen to what Chuck Schumer had to say during his intervention at the Senate floor today.
Fourth major obstacle to peace is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has all too frequently bowed to the demands of extremists. And I believe that holding a new election, once the war starts to wind down, would give Israelis an opportunity to express their vision.
So, Tiffany, immediately House Republicans, of course, strongly rejected these words from Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. I spoke with Congressman Van Orden, who was a former Navy SEAL and, of course, is very aware of the threat of terrorism and the security issues from the Middle East. And this is what he had to say in response to Senator Chuck Schumer's comments on Israel. Let's listen to Congressman Van Orden.
It is a grossly irresponsible thing to do for the leader of the Senate to call for regime change in our closest and strongest ally in the Middle East. I cannot believe that Chuck Schumer would be doing this now. And here's something else you have to understand. Chuck Schumer would not have said this in a vacuum.
Tiffany, I personally thought it was very interesting what Congressman Van Orden said, that he did not think that this happened in a vacuum. Congressman Van Orden made comments, reference that Senator Chuck Schumer has the Biden administration's support in these comments. We also talked to Congressman Keith Self from Texas, who happens to be a member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, and he went a step further, Tiffany, and called Senator Chuck Schumer's comments election interference. Let's hear what he had to say.
That's not Chuck Schumer's job. Our job, that's election interference. Now, they've gotten away with election interference in the United States, so maybe he thinks he can get away with election interference in international affairs.
So, Tiffany, at the end of the day, the second day of the House Republican policy retreat here in Greenbrier Resort, West Virginia, did end up with some House Republican unity, a unity in rejection of Senator Chuck Schumer's comments and unity in support of Israel and their defense against Hamas. Back to you, Tiffany.
Louise, thanks for that update. President Biden continuing his ramped-up campaign travels following his State of the Union address. Today, he's visiting a battleground state where he may be particularly vulnerable in November. NTD's Iris Tao has more from the White House.
President Biden is in Michigan today as part of his campaign swing to battleground states. But in Michigan, which Biden narrowly won in 2020 by some 150,000 votes, he's now facing a new and quite substantial challenge. In a Democratic primary last month, over 100,000 voters voted uncommitted in protest of Biden's handling of the war in Gaza. And on top of that, a new poll released on Thursday by Quinnipiac University shows that Biden is trailing behind former President Trump in Michigan by some 5 percentage points. And in the latest clash between the two candidates, President Biden is trying to seize on Trump's recent comments and accuse him of trying to cut Social Security. Here's what Biden was saying in Wisconsin on Wednesday. Watch.
Just this week, Donald Trump said cuts to Social Security and Medicare are on the table. When asked if he changed his position, he said, quote, "There's a lot we can do in terms of cutting. I will never allow it to happen."
But Trump on Wednesday tried to clarify his comments by saying that he would, quote, never do anything that will jeopardize or hurt Social Security or Medicare. And Trump's campaign says his earlier comments were actually referring to cutting waste in general. And as President Biden wraps up his trips to swing states, including Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and today Michigan, all in the past week, Vice President Kamala Harris is in Minnesota today visiting an abortion clinic. She called an issue that's on the ballot in November. Watch.
One of the points that must be made on this issue as we attempt to uplift the real stories and the real consequences of the Dobbs decision is to remind people elections matter. Elections matter.
Her visit is seen as the first visit to an abortion clinic by a sitting U.S. vice president. And it comes as Democrats are trying to use the abortion issue to motivate their base in November. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And turning our attention to former President Trump's hush money trial in a new court filing today, prosecutors in New York said they are willing to push back the case for up to 30 days. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office says this proposed delay is to review new materials turned over by federal prosecutors this week. That includes about 31,000 pages of discovery material. The trial is currently scheduled to start on March 25th, but this potential delay would push it to late April. Trump's defense teams have been requesting to postpone trials until after the election. Turning to Trump's classified documents case in Florida, the judge just denied one of the motions to dismiss the charges. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards is outside the courthouse. Arlene, what was Trump's lawyer arguing today?
Good evening, Tiffany. So the judge denied the motion that was seeking to dismiss counts 1 through 32 on the basis of unconstitutional vagueness. Now, she said that the arguments warranted, quote, serious consideration, and she did not want to decide prematurely. She said resolving this issue depended too much on fluctuating definitions of certain terms and phrases in the Espionage Act, which is the law used to charge Trump. His attorneys argued that certain terms and phrases under the act were not clearly defined, and those terms are unauthorized possession, relating to the national defense, and entitled to receive. Now, these all relate to some of the arguments they gave for their second motion about the Presidential Records Act. They said that Trump was the president when he ordered the documents be moved from the White House to Florida, and as president, he had the authority to designate them as personal property. The judge was also skeptical about that motion as well. She said that she couldn't resolve the issues related to the Presidential Records Act. Now, Trump had argued that the prosecution charged Trump under the wrong statute and that this matter could have been handled under the Presidential Records Act. Judge Cannon did not see a clear distinction between the two acts, and she also felt like this motion was premature because it was not discussed in the original indictment. She also questioned whether or not these records should be reviewed to determine which were presidential and which were personal. Now, although she has not ruled on that motion yet, I expect that she will also deny it on the grounds that it is premature and that this issue could be raised again at the time of trial.
Arlene, thanks for that update. The crisis in Haiti could bring more illegal immigrants to the United States. This as illegal immigration is already hitting record highs. We have details on that and a plan to bring Haitian immigrants to Guantanamo Bay.
This video shows black plumes of smoke coming out of Haiti's main prison on Thursday. Earlier this month, armed gang members freed thousands of prisoners from this facility. It's not clear yet whether anyone remains in the jail or what sparked the blaze. 80% of the people in Haiti's capital reportedly live under the rule of violent gangs. The country's prime minister on Monday announced that he'll resign. This came amid increased pressure from organized crime, which is also putting Americans in Haiti at risk.
We are not actively planning for any evacuation.
The U.S. State Department on Thursday said that Haiti has been on a travel advisory list for the past 4 years.
For 4 years, we have been telling Americans, do not go to Haiti. Do not travel there. It's not safe to do so. And for those who are there, leave as soon as you can feasibly do so without putting yourself at risk.
Americans aren't the only ones expected to flee Haiti now. Many are concerned about a possible mass exodus of people from Haiti into the United States. Congressman Tom Tiffany on Thursday tweeted, "Haitians should not be brought into the U.S. America is already drowning in foreign migrants thanks to Joe Biden." Congressman Andy Biggs said the turmoil in Haiti is likely to bring many Haitian immigrants, including many gang members. We must secure our border before anything else. The White House is considering expanding the capacity at a migrant center in Guantanamo Bay, which, as you can see here, is located between Haiti and the U.S. mainland. The migrant center is separate from the prison where terrorist suspects are held. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said he's, quote, dedicating significant resources to combat illegal vessels coming to Florida from countries such as Haiti. DeSantis is sending over 250 additional officers and soldiers and over a dozen air and sea craft to the southern coast of Florida. Those resources are coming from the Division of Emergency Management, the State Guard, and the police. The ongoing violence in Haiti has also prompted the U.S. to deploy an elite team of Marines to protect the American embassy there. Earlier this week, the Pentagon announced it would be doubling its funding for a multinational security support mission in Haiti.
Back in the U.S., New York City will be getting federal funds to cover some of the costs stemming from the illegal immigration crisis. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced that the Big Apple will get $106 million in federal reimbursement. That money is part of a $150 million funding package for the city that Congress passed last year. Mayor Eric Adams' office said they'll continue to work closely with federal partners to get the money released. The announcement comes as New York City already spent over $1.4 billion on the immigration crisis in fiscal year 2023. The city has rented hotels and converted a range of venues to house the illegal immigrants coming into the city. Coming up, family members of hostages are trying to stay hopeful as chances for a ceasefire diminish. Meanwhile, Israel's prime minister gives a defiant message to Israeli troops. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer calling Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu an obstacle to peace. Our guest, a former Israeli intelligence official, explains who he thinks is actually preventing peace in the Middle East. And Senator Mitt Romney says the U.S. is failing to stop China's global domination. We'll have details on a Senate hearing on America's strategic strategy in the Pacific Islands when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The chances for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip appear to have diminished, and family members of hostages are trying to stay hopeful. Meanwhile, Israel's prime minister gave a defiant message to troops about an upcoming battle. NTD's Jason Perry has the war update.
Protesters in Tel Aviv blocked traffic on Thursday, demanding an immediate release of the hostages in Hamas captivity. There are over 100 hostages who have been held in captivity for over 5 months in the Gaza Strip. Many were hoping that a ceasefire deal could be reached before Ramadan, including the sister-in-law of a hostage.
When Mondays passed and nothing happened, we broke. It was very hard, because we really, really believe that this is the day that something will happen, and nothing happened.
This man is the head of the Health and Resilience Committee on the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. He explained that the families of hostages are going through something called ambiguous loss.
We know from our survey that the physical condition and mental condition of the families deteriorate with time. We know that they cannot sleep. We know that many of them are taking antidepressant, anti-anxiety pills. Many of them are in need for psychological care, but they don't have the time to treat themselves.
Israel has said that only through military pressure will Hamas release the hostages. On Thursday, the IDF released this video showing terrorists with weapons inside this building in Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip before the IDF destroyed the building. But Israel itself has been receiving international pressure to not fight Hamas terrorists in the crowded Gaza city of Rafah. Israel's prime minister met with Israeli troops on Thursday.
I will continue to repel the pressure and we will enter Rafah. We will complete the elimination of the remaining Hamas battalions.
An Israeli government spokesperson on Thursday explained what could happen if Israel doesn't defeat Hamas in its final stronghold.
Hamas will just rearm, they could retake Gaza, and we'll return to a reality that we found ourselves in on October 6th, by which Hamas wants to perpetrate October 7th again and again and again.
Meanwhile, trucks of humanitarian aid continue to enter the Gaza Strip, while a ship carrying 200 tons of food is still making its way through the Mediterranean Sea. Satellite imagery shows construction is underway to prepare for the ship's arrival in the Gaza Strip, and it could be there in the next 2 or 3 days. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Joining us now to react to Schumer's speech against Netanyahu is Avi Melamed. He's a former Israeli intelligence official and senior advisor on Arab affairs. Avi Melamed, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is criticizing Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that there should be new elections over there. What is the Israel reaction to this?
Well, I think it depends who do you ask. Obviously, in the government and in the right wing, they will kind of like be very resentful of such an announcement. In fact, already I heard that the Israeli ambassador made a comment about it, saying that Israel is a sovereign democracy and it has a sovereign legitimate government. Yet again, if you will ask people in Israel coming from the more central to the left part, they will definitely, support that statement. So I think that it depends who you ask in Israel. You will find both answers.
And from your perspective, why is Schumer calling for this? Would a change in prime minister actually change the way Israel deals with Hamas?
Well, that's a very good question. Look, on the one level, it clearly indicates the built-in, and I would even say building up tension between Netanyahu personally and some elements in his government and the Biden administration vis-a-vis the whole trajectory ahead of the war, particularly when we are talking about the issue of Rafah. So this is one layer. As for the question whether if it was another prime minister in Israel, I would say that it's more likely to expect that there would be more, I would say, wider foundation for trust in the relationship between another Israeli government prime minister and the Biden administration, because obviously there are some tensions between Biden and Netanyahu on the personal level. So that for itself could, of course, have a different impact on the nature of the relationship and the nature of the positions of the both sides vis-a-vis the trajectory ahead of the situation in Gaza. But I'm not so sure to say that another Israeli prime minister will be very much different in its position in comparison to Netanyahu's position vis-a-vis the management of the war and the objectives of the war, because in the end of the day, I think it's important to emphasize that when Netanyahu is talking about the non-compromising demand of bringing all the hostages back and the non-compromising objective of not going back to October 6th, eliminating Hamas military power and ending Hamas rule in Gaza Strip, it's very clear that to a large extent Netanyahu is expressing the wide consensus among Israeli Jewish public opinion.
Now, in terms of Chuck Schumer's comments, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is actually pushing back, saying the primary obstacles to peace in Israel's region are terrorists like Hamas and, quote, corrupt leaders of the Palestinian Authority who have repeatedly rejected peace deals from multiple Israeli governments. Now, is McConnell's stance right here, but also about preventing peace in the region? But what do you make of that?
Yes, I totally agree with that statement, and I will add to that, of course, the Iranian regime, because we have to put this war in a wider context. This war has been part of, in the end of the day, the Iranian regime master plan to become the hegemonic superpower in the Middle East. The Iranian regime has an interest in further escalating the conflict, and the Iranian regime would like to see more Palestinians and more Israelis killed, the same way he did with Lebanon and Syria and Iraq. And so I think that's important to understand that as long as Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the Iranian regime will be able to continue and dictate their radical agenda, there is no hope, neither to Israelis, nor to the Palestinians, nor to the region, and I would add also now to the world, because what we see right now is that one of the Iranian regime's proxies, the Houthis in Yemen, are holding the world hostage as they are attacking global trade in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The Iranian regime and its proxies presents a very serious threat domestically, regionally, and globally.
And given that, in terms of deterrence, then, what should the U.S. be doing?
Look, in the end of the day, the key is in Tehran, and it's very clear that Tehran, the Mullah regime by now is not deterred, because the Mullah regime is relying on the proxy system. Why? Because the proxy system provides the Mullah regime with immunity. So they activate the proxies, but they are sitting safe and sound in Tehran. That has to be changed. There are other couple of ways to do that. One way is to start charging some painful price inside Iran, not necessarily in the context of like overtly acting, but there are other ways to do that. And one other thing is to start speaking in the language that the Mullah regime understands very well, and this is the language of holding hostages. You see, the Mullah regime holds today the world hostage vis-a-vis through the Houthis in Yemen who are attacking the global trade. Maybe it's about time to start holding some major assets of the Iranian as hostages themselves. For example, Assad regime in Syria. I think there is an ability and there is circumstances and conditions existing today to hold Assad regime as a hostage in the hands of the world, basically sending a clear message to the Iranians: we can also hold hostages your assets. Unless you are going to change your way, you may be paying a very difficult price, a very significant price for your atrocities and for your aggressions across the region.
Avi Melamed, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
With the fate of TikTok hanging in the balance, former Trump Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin says he's interested in buying the app. Mnuchin said today that he's assembling a team of investors to make a bid to buy the social media platform. This comes after the House passed a bill on Wednesday to ban TikTok from U.S. app stores if it doesn't cut ties with its Chinese parent company. Mnuchin said existing U.S. investors would be able to keep their stakes in TikTok, but none would have more than 10% control. The bill still faces an uncertain future in the Senate. President Biden said he would sign it into law if it reached his desk. In that case, TikTok's parent company ByteDance would have 5 months to sell the social media platform. Senator Mitt Romney says that the U.S. is failing to stop China's global domination. This as the Senate held a hearing today on U.S. strategy in the Pacific Islands. NTD's Virginia Gibson has more.
China, from what I can tell, has a game plan and it's succeeding. We don't have a game plan I recognize, and whether we do or not, we're not succeeding.
Lawmakers held a hearing Thursday on countering China's expanding influence in the Pacific Islands region, where around 30,000 islands are located.
China is the economic force within that region. So long as they therefore do not have an option for their economic vitality and well-being of their citizens, they're somewhat hostage to China.
Senator Bob Menendez says the U.S. trades very little with the Pacific Islands and can't compete with China's economic influence there. Experts say the U.S. is focusing on other areas.
Our strategy is based on meeting their needs in terms of security, combating climate change, infrastructure investment, and the like. So our focus has been primarily in those sectors. We also promote good governance.
Daniel Crittenbrink is the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs. He says he's concerned China is sending law enforcement officers to the islands and establishing police forces there. The U.S. doesn't send American police officers to the islands.
We have our own law enforcement training programs active throughout the Pacific. Our partners like Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Australia, and New Zealand, they actually have police forces on the ground in many of these countries.
Experts fear China could use their officers to suppress dissidents and to use other means to do so.
We've seen a surge in investment by the PRC in the telecommunications sector in recent years, which can leave nations vulnerable to cybersecurity risks and other national security concerns.
Michael Schiffer is the Assistant Administrator of the Bureau for Asia at the U.S. Agency for International Development. He says the U.S. and its partners are working to provide alternatives for everything China provides.
The PRC is not motivated by developing an economically viable and sustainable program, but is motivated by other geostrategic considerations.
Senator Mitt Romney is not sure if the U.S. has much of a plan to counter China.
We're losing, if you will, on the strategic battlefield.
He says if the U.S. does have a plan, it doesn't seem to be working. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
Coming up, both sides present their arguments on whether to dismiss former President Trump's classified documents case. Trump's attorney in his civil cases shares his reaction. And Senator Bernie Sanders wants to reduce the standard work week from 40 hours to 32 without cutting pay. What experts say about test trials and economic implications after the break. Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. In an unprecedented speech in Congress, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer criticized Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Schumer called Netanyahu an obstacle to peace and said Israel needs to hold new elections to replace him. The speech drew condemnation from Republican lawmakers. President Biden campaigned in Michigan, a key battleground state in the November election. This came after over 100,000 Democratic voters in the state protested against the president by voting uncommitted in the primary. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg says his office is open to delaying former President Trump's hush money trial by 30 days. That means the trial will start in late April. And in Trump's classified documents case, the judge denied one of the motions to dismiss the case. Trump's attorneys had argued the charges should be dropped due to unconstitutional vagueness. Trump was in the courthouse for the hearing. And earlier today, we spoke with Jesse Banal, an attorney for former President Trump in his civil cases. We discussed the arguments presented in the court hearing over Trump's classified documents case. Jesse Banal, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, in Trump's classified documents case, the prosecution is pointing to public statements by Trump saying that he knew his retention of the documents was illegal. Meanwhile, the defense attorneys argued this did not meet the fair notice standard. What do you make of the developments in this case so far?
Well, I mean, of course, it is absolutely required that you put a defendant on full notice of what and the prosecution is charging them with. What they're saying is exactly a crime. And Jack Smith's team just absolutely has not done that in this case. The defense, I think, is correct on that. That they really are basing their prosecution in a lot of ways on innuendo more than specific facts to put you on notice of what a crime is. And I'd say that the most important thing here in this case to remember is that presidents have absolutely the right to their records. They can have access to their records even when they leave office. This is not something that's new. This has been the way that presidential records have worked since the beginning of the republic. And in recent years, when the issue of how presidential records are kept was put into the statute books, even then it was very, very clear that presidents retained access to their records. So for any number of different reasons, Jack Smith's team, their theory of this case is simply wrong, and it is another example of election interference where Jack Smith has just proved he will do everything he possibly can to stop Donald Trump from being elected president of the United States again, and we're seeing more of the same on that.
A question that has come up was the Espionage Act versus the Presidential Records Act, with the judge asking the parties whether the defense's reading of the Presidential Records Act made it so the statute superseded the Espionage Act, which then makes the unauthorized possession of classified information illegal. What did you make of that?
Well, so first of all, one of the things that I'm saying, at least based on the reporting of what's being said in court today, is this is a very active judge that's asking very, very good questions, very deep questions. She's expecting lawyers to do their job and to answer her questions on the law. And I think when you get down into the differences of the Espionage Act and the Presidential Records Act, that's going to be especially important. And here's one of the reasons that this is important, is because Congress decided to make the president subject to the Presidential Records Act. And, you know, there's some questions about whether constitutionally Congress even could do that because of our separation of powers. But to the extent that you manage presidential records at all, it's through that act. It's through the Presidential Records Act. The Espionage Act, on the other hand, is not something that Congress ever decided to make the president subject to. And, you know, before people go and say that, you know, in a nation of laws, you know, the president is subject to laws just like everybody else. When you look at separation of powers, it is different. It is important because courts have said that if you want to actually make it so a president is subject to a particular law, Congress has to be clear about that. And it's not because anybody is above the law or below the law. It's because we need to make sure that that one branch doesn't encroach on the constitutional prerogatives of the other branch. And access to records, even after somebody that leaves office at that point, is something, when you get to criminal law, that has never been extended to the president or even former presidents. So for that reason, I think there's some very important differences between the Espionage Act and the Presidential Records Act. The judge appears to be asking good questions. There's all kinds of pressure, of course, on judges, you know, by especially Jack Smith's team in this case, and those supporting him. So we'll see what she does with the case. But I think it's reassuring to Americans to see a judge who is asking such thorough questions of both parties.
Now, defense attorneys are arguing that the Department of Justice chose not to prosecute Biden for retention, and therefore it wouldn't be criminal in Trump's case either. How do you view this? What are the merits in this argument?
I think it's a very important argument. In fact, one of the things that the Department of Justice's position was in the Biden case was that because they were prosecuting Donald Trump in Florida, there was no need to prosecute President Biden for his documents. Specifically, what they said was there wouldn't be a deterrent, a necessary deterrent to future presidents to go after Joe Biden because they were already going after Donald Trump. I think that's particularly problematic in a case like this because it's not showing that people are being treated fairly, depending on, regardless of what side of the political spectrum they fall on. And so I think it's very, while selective prosecution cases are very difficult for a defendant to win, in this case, this is the perfect example of selective prosecution. When you have one person, Joe Biden, where you definitely meet the elements of the offense, where, I mean, he took and had classified documents all over the country in areas that were not secure, whereas in President Trump's case, if you just look at the allegations from the government, his documents were under Secret Service protection the entire time. They were highly secured, and Mar-a-Lago is a very secure facility. It's very, very different from having it in a garage next to all kinds of other documents where you've got pictures of them just sitting there in the open. In Joe Biden's case, and it's also important again to remember that the Presidential Records Act, which provides that presidents do have access to their records for the rest of their lives, does not apply to vice presidents. And the records that Joe Biden had that were classified, he didn't get during his term of his presidency. These all took place when he was vice president and when he was in the United States Senate. So other laws like the Federal Records Act, which is much more severe, are at play there. And it actually would be much easier to get a conviction against Joe Biden rather than Donald Trump. But of course, the Department of Justice's position is that Joe Biden his mind is too feeble to get a conviction against him.
Jesse Bernal, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Could the U.S. reduce the standard work week from 40 hours to 32 without a loss in pay? The U.S. Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions today discussed the pros and cons.
Millions of workers in our country.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders introduced the 32-hour Workweek Act, saying new tech and AI should result in fewer working hours.
One of the issues that we have got to talk about is stress in this country. The fact that so many people are going to work exhausted, physically and mentally. And the fact that we have not changed the Fair Labor Standards Act. This was in 1940. We came up with a 40-hour work week. 1940.
Workers would be paid overtime for working more than 8 hours a day and double time if over 12 hours. But could this devastate the economy?
The government mandating a 32-hour work week requiring businesses to increase pay at least an extra 25% per hour would, frankly, destroy some employers. They would ship those jobs overseas, or they would automate to replace those workers for whom they have an increased expense, or they would dramatically increase prices to make this stay afloat.
Those in favor of the mandate say,
we have a mental health crisis we talk about a lot in this country, but we never talk about the causes of that. There's been studies done, increases in stress from working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, you're sacrificing family life, things you want to pursue.
Our results have been extremely positive for both workers and the companies. We have 26 well-being measures for more than 3,600 employees, every one of which registers improvement from baseline to the end of the trial. Nearly 60% of employees experience better work-family balance.
One company tried out a 6-week pilot.
And the results of our pilot were clear. Our goal achievement rate soared from 62% to 95%. Customer response times and satisfaction ratings stayed the same. Employee retention increased from 82% to 98%.
And the opposition.
It is self-selection. These companies are choosing to be a part of this. And so they are able to cut out extraneous meetings. They are able to shorten coffee breaks. They are able to go to remote meetings for some things so you don't have to commute, whatever it is.
And I've never heard of anything that you've just mentioned in a small business.
Let's give flexibility to workers and to employers. Don't have government come in and intervene. It's going directly in the opposite position of where we should be going.
Sanders concluded, saying the hearing was to get the issue heard on a congressional level. David Lamb, NTD News.
Coming up, a rat and mold infestation at a New Orleans police station. Rodents are munching on the evidence, including marijuana. And Paris says there will be no air conditioning in the Olympic Village this summer, what the city plans to do instead, and how different Olympic committees around the world are reacting. That and more after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The New Orleans Police Headquarters infested with mold and pests. Officers say rats have been munching on confiscated marijuana and getting high.
Rats have gotten into confiscated pot at New Orleans' aging police headquarters. The city's police chief told city council members the pests were munching the evidence as the building was taken over by mold and cockroaches.
The uncleanliness is off the charts, but it's even health issues such as mold, heavy mold, in these buildings, rodent infestation. People shouldn't have to come to their office and see rodent drippings on their desk. The rats eating our marijuana, they're all high.
The offices have housed New Orleans police since 1968. City officials are taking steps to move the department to a new space, a priority of the police chief since she took office in October. The chief said her 910 officers come to work to find air conditioning and elevators broken. She told council members the conditions are demoralizing to staff and a turnoff to potential recruits coming for interviews.
The fact that officers have nowhere to use a restroom, this is not acceptable. To have your plumbing go completely out in your department. These are basics, and when we say we value our employees, you can't say that and at the same time allow people to work in conditions that are not acceptable.
The city council is weighing a proposal to spend $7.6 million on a 10-year lease to temporarily relocate police headquarters to a pair of floors in a downtown high-rise building. The New Orleans Advocate reported that the council's Criminal Justice Committee agreed Monday to advance the leasing proposal to the city council for a vote. Kirkpatrick says the rental agreement would give the department time to come up with plans for a new permanent headquarters.
With the Paris Olympics now just 4 months away, the city's socialist mayor Anne Hidalgo has announced there will be no air conditioning in the Olympic Village as part of her plans to make the greenest games ever. NTD's Dave Martin has more.
The Paris Olympic Village, where the athletes will be housed, has been designed using a cooling system that draws water from underground, with exterior facades oriented so they get little direct sun in lieu of air conditioning. With temperatures expected in the 90s, Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo says to trust the science instead. While some countries have offered support, Olympic committees in Australia, Brazil, Canada, and Norway are among those who don't believe it'll be enough.
We're looking at portable air conditioners to offer the athletes, should they choose to, if it gets hot, if it's comfortable. Some people don't like to sleep in air conditioning, they like to sleep in room temperature. And so just being able to ensure that we have the best information and the best choices and options for our athletes for them to make the decision that works best for them is what we're working towards.
Hidalgo, meanwhile, also said she thought Russian athletes should be banned from the Olympics, calling Putin a dictator who threatens Europe. Currently, athletes from Russia and Belarus are allowed to participate as neutrals without flags or anthems being played. Meanwhile, Paris is working toward making its famous Seine River swimmable for the Olympics, as it was when the Games were there back in 1900. Last summer, a sewer problem led to the cancellation of a pre-Olympics swimming event. This is Dave Martin for NTD News.
It's the Hollywood Awards season. Would you like a sneak peek of the Emmy Awards pre-party? Tune in to Right on LA with Ruby Lovell this Sunday afternoon at 3:30 p.m. Eastern right here on NTD. An island salt patch is one of the last remaining in all of Hawaii. 22 native families come together to make traditional Hawaiian salt. NTD's Andrew Thomas has more on the indigenous practice.
Before walking into the Hana Pepe salt patch, Kanani Santos removes his footwear. Then he stands quietly for a few moments.
As I walk in here before I enter this place, I like stopping right before that trail to take off my shoes to get myself ready to enter something like this. So I take a deep breath and take it all in, and I say a little prayer to myself.
But over the past decade, development has threatened the salt patch on the island of Kauai. Pollution from nearby aircraft, sand erosion from vehicles, and litter add to the problem. Other salt-making families are searching for solutions to save their patch. One strategy is to block vehicles from driving onto the beach.
We want to continue to share the space with everyone. So that's why we were like, okay, no, let's just block so that all the boulders are here, keep the cars here. And over time, we've definitely seen this berm naturally restore itself.
The salt is always given away, never sold, an important part of this cultural and spiritual practice.
I was always taught to give it away. And when my dad told me it's our responsibility to give it away, those were such powerful words in my soul.
Santos believes they're making their elders proud by keeping this traditional practice alive, and he hopes to pass it on to future generations. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. For more, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.